What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking up with Thor, the God of Hammer storyline, which has just concluded, so we're going to keep this going for the next about 6 weeks or so. One episode each week, right? We'll do this, what is today, Wednesday? This was supposed to go out yesterday on Tuesday, but the Miss Marvel trailer dropped, so we ended up doing that instead. So, from Tuesdays going forward is when we'll have this coming out, and it starts off a little bit slow, right? That's one of the things you guys probably know just from like going through and looking at like Donny Cates stories. They start off a little bit slow in the first like issue or two, and then it just kind of blows up after that. And this one does exactly that. It goes in after about issue number 2. What this does here, and this is really kind of cool, it's a little bit of Donny Cates kind of rewriting things in terms of like the history of Marvel. Not in a major significant way, but kind of in a smaller way, right? One of the things he talks about is the idea of elder gods. Now, elder gods have been depicted in different ways over the course of Marvel Comics. I mean, we know this just from our coverage of Thor over the years, right? Jason Aaron presented us with the idea of the elder gods insofar as like Gore the God Butcher and the different elder gods that existed across different worlds, gods of love and gods of peace and gods of golden girls, just all different kinds of stuff. All different kinds of gods. And in fact, Donny Cates actually lists them off here, right? Like the Black Winter, the God Tempest, right? The King in Black, the Phoenix. Now, the God Tempest is one of those things that's really interesting here because the God Tempest was introduced to us as basically the source of Thor's hammer, right? Like why the hammer is able to choose who gets to wield it. Because the God Tempest was at one point a cosmic entity. It was kind of manifested as like this physical storm that was raging across the cosmos. And ultimately, Odin and the storm fought each other until such a point where Odin was able to take a piece of Uru metal and then trap the cosmic entity inside that Uru metal and then have a hammer built out of it. And that's really what we're shown here, right? That like the various elder gods facing off against each other, right? Fighting, that this led to worlds smashing against each other and meteors hitting Earth and so on and so forth. Now, we could also look at this as a little metatextual, that the concept of like elder gods fighting is sort of a end comic representation of just the chaotic nature of the universe, right? That like sometimes things just happen, almost sort of like how you would look at primitive stories now in terms of like the explanation of the world, right? Like the Bashango people of Central Africa and like the great god Bamba and the creation of all things, right? You know, that kind of stuff. So again, it can kind of go either way. It is Marvel Comics. I would say Donny Cates is coming at this from a more literal perspective. Like there were gods in space fighting each other, and then like when one of them hit the other one with a world, a piece of that world broke off and then it crashed on Earth and killed the dinosaurs. You know, like it's comics. So you could probably just roll with it. But regardless, over the years, and the way this is done is that over the years, the Hammer of Thor has been a central focal point of not really even just Thor himself, right? Mjolnir's been significant insofar as its creation and the role it plays within Asgard. It's as much a symbol as it is a weapon being used by Thor. Now, in a lot of ways, it's synonymous with Thor. It was synonymous with Thor when Jane Foster was using it, and it's synonymous with Thor now that Odinson is using it. It kind of goes hand in hand. It's like Captain America and his shield. And so it's one of those things where really Odinson kind of recounts all this, right? Thor talks about all this stuff and says that like in the twilight of things, right before Jane Foster quote unquote died and ended up coming back as Valkyrie, that what happened is of course in that fight between her and the Mangog, probably one of the best villains ever in the entirety of the Thor mythos, just this unstoppable force of anger that just destroys everything in its path, that the Mangog had basically been chained up by the hammer of Thor, and then when the hammer was thrown into the sun, the Mangog was taken with it. Now, one of the things we talked about at the end of that, and this is something I want to kind of offer an aside here, the sun is not enough to kill the Mangog. Not at all. You know, someone like Odin could survive the destruction of a sun, and Odin is terrified of the Mangog, right? The Mangog is basically this unstoppable force. There's no real way to kill it. There's no real way to, I mean, sure, if you're like a person who can alter reality, you can just phase him out of existence, but even then it's questionable because Marvel's always presented the Mangog as just the physical embodiment of hatred, right? The people that hated Odin because Odin eradicated their race. That is hatred and anger given a physical form. So the Mangog will always return, just kind of, you know, until the universe ends, it'll always find a way back. But regardless, the hammer, of course, ended up returning, and that's how Thor ended up getting his hands on it. There's no indication that Mangog came with it, so maybe Mangog's still stuck in the sun, we're not really sure. But over the course of the entirety of Donny Cates' run, he's really been hitting on this idea that for some reason or another, Thor is able to lift his hammer, but seemingly so is everybody else. Right now, it's kind of turning things on its head, but also leaning into the kind of pastiche that's been going on recently. Right, one of the big complaints that a lot of Thor fans have is that ever since the Walt Simonson days and the days of Beta Ray Bill lifting Mjolnir, that where it started out is like, wow, wow, someone else can lift the hammer of Thor, that's crazy. Now it's business as usual. Like, hey, are you telling a Thor story and you really want to get people just to buy it? Have it on the cover that someone else lifts his hammer. And people might buy it because, you know, it doesn't really shock people anymore, but it stands a better chance than if they're not, than if nobody's lifting his hammer. So it's one of those things. And I imagine Donny Cates, right, the guy's no fool, he's a phenomenal writer. It's cool to see him lean into this, right? And almost kind of offer this thing that it's like, okay, you know what? If it's really becoming this sort of hallmark of the Thor mythos that like everybody can lift Thor's hammer, then let's craft a story around it. Let's make a story based on that, right? Let's answer this question that all these fans have, which is why is everybody able to lift the hammer of Thor? And so what Odinson does is he actually goes and visits Sif. Now remember, Heimdall's out of the picture, and with Sif being the sister of Heimdall, she's basically taken his place. So now she's the one that sees everything. And the question that he has here is, can you see my hammer? And her response is, no, I can't see where your hammer is. I can't see who has your hammer. I have no idea what's going on here, right? All I know, or at least all you know, is your hammer's gone, and we don't know where it is. And so following that, this basically leads to us jumping to what is in effect a kind of gladiatorial ring. Now, this is one of those concepts that Donny Cates is really experimenting on and really experimenting with, and in fact it looks like the hand of one of the Celestials, or at least the head of the Celestial in Nowhere, but the way it's described here is it said there is no earthly translation for the arena before you, no common tongue that agrees on its origin. Some claim it a remnant of a long lost civilization, hunted down, dissected, and scattered in the early days of Null's campaign of blood across the stars. Some claim it to be sentient, somehow still alive, its great fingers moaning and curling in the empty freezing wind of the abyss, grasping in the dark for a body that is long past its reach, crying out for ears long dead and deaf. All can agree that it is a place no man should ever know, that to see it, to know it, is to never sleep again. It's a place of testing. The black hand of God, it's the pit, right? It's where people go for whatever reason, where they basically end up getting involved in this kind of gauntlet and they fight each other. Now, the funny thing about this is that Odin was basically dropped off here. Now, we don't know if people can leave of their own accord or if Odin simply just doesn't have the power to do it on his own. All we know is that at the end of the previous story arc, that Odin had basically met with Angela and the two of them had left together, and essentially Angela just left him here, right? And then just took off, and that was basically it. But Thor arriving here on the scene is really him meeting with Odin as the person who created Mjolnir and saying, I need your help to find this hammer. It's one of those funny things though, because seemingly everybody knows that Mjolnir is missing and that Thor doesn't have it, right? It's one of those things because the hammer is so significant in the cosmos, and even Thor with the hammer is so significant. It's like Captain America having no shield. You know, it's like the Silver Surfer having no surfboard. People will notice, like they will realize that Thor does not have his hammer. And because the two go hand in hand together, if for some reason Thor does not have his hammer, then it means it's either destroyed, it's somehow broken, or just generally not available to him. And so that's how everything has kind of been put together as far as Odin goes and all these different guys. And so the two of them basically ended up traveling to Nidavellir. Now, this is a really important thing, and the reason why this happens is because Thor asked the question, I do not know why you would bring me to the dwarves. I am not in need of a weapon forged. I need Mjolnir, returning before it falls into ill hands. And the response of Odin is, the dwarves can track their creations across the stars. If anybody can find your hammer, it would be them. And it makes sense, right? The dwarves are like the best smiths in basically any of the realms, essentially in the universe. If you're somebody out there that wants to have a weapon made and the dwarves of Nidavellir will make it for you, you will have a weapon that is virtually unstoppable, right? That is essentially indestructible, especially if it's magically enchanted Uru metal in the way that Thor's hammer is. The issue is that when they get there, the elves have all been destroyed, right? Like literally the elves of Nidavellir have all been killed here. And it's kind of nuts because initially the idea was like, okay, like apparently there's war in this forge. And that's when Thor's like, no, this was no war, right? Like look at the Valraven, right? There's no blood on their talons, still on their perches, right? It's impossible. Whatever it was that happened here happened without anybody realizing what was going on. They were caught by surprise. These are the birds that see all. The ravens of Odin, like they see everything. And so it's one of those situations that's why you can't like sneak into Nidavellir, right? That's why like, you know, Black Widow couldn't like don her costume and say, okay, come on, Hawkeye, we're gonna sneak into the forge of Nidavellir and we are going to, we're gonna steal from the dwarves, right? That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Right, they see everybody coming from a mile away, but whoever this was able to avoid that. Not only that, they were killed instantaneously before they ever had time to react. Not only that, once they actually get into the forge itself, any dwarves that resided in this forge were killed, and the forge itself was completely destroyed. Seemingly, the ability to create another version of Mjolnir is gone. And it's one of those things that just totally baffles both Odin and Thor. They're like, okay, so like the dwarves are all dead and the forge has been shattered. How could this possibly be done? And the response of Odin is like, look at them. Like, look at the bodies of these dwarves. Look at how they've basically been crushed. You've wielded it for eons now. If anyone knows, it would be you. And the response of Thor is, yes, like I see it. Whoever it was that killed these guys used my hammer to do it. They killed the dwarves using Mjolnir. Now, I will say this, once the perpetrator is revealed, it's crazy. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.